Okay, so before we get started, I think it is fair we discuss Evangelion and Rebuild. I think it's a good place to start in a place like this and get me nice and cozy into the discussion. Have a little bit of this. Oh, cheers, by the way, if you're having a beverage. So, oh, it is nice. It has a nutty taste to it. Evangelion is, to this day, my all-time favorite anime. I adore this series deeply. I think it is one of the most profoundly, wonderfully written anime of all time, personally. I am not saying it is the best anime for everyone, but I will say it is my personal favorite anime. I think it is... The characters are terrifically written. I think they are components of the anime that, as time goes on, have aged poorly, and other elements that have aged even better. Especially as anime has fallen on a lot of stereotypes and cliches. Not to say all anime are stereotypical and cliche, but I'm saying a lot of anime do fall back on tropes that are familiar to the audience. You know, I'm working right now on a video about fan service, and one thing I noticed was that a lot of them, from season to season, one series ends and then the next season starts and there's a show just like it next season, so you have a continual thread of similar stuff. Eva, I feel, is a throwback to stuff that was popular in the 70s when Anno was like much younger, but it's also because of the place mecha anime was in the 90s, it felt refreshing then. And because of the tropes deconstructed, the characterization, the elements of a really, you know, I would say Shinji Ikari is a lot like Amuro Ray from Gundam. You know, a very traumatized person, not someone you're supposed to look up to, someone you're supposed to maybe even dislike a little. So, now, I should say right now, I have no idea who RetroBlasting is. I don't know this guy. This is the first time I've ever seen his stuff for this video. I don't know who he is. I don't know what he wants. I don't know what he's about. I've only seen the first a little less than 10 minutes of one of his videos, and that is enough to make me want to do this entire video. I don't know what he wants. I don't know what his perspectives are. He could be a nice guy having a rough day. I don't know. I don't know the guy. But I do know how he responded to me and how it upset me. So, I was tagged in response to RetroBlasting's review of Evangelion. From my understanding, he's not a big anime fan. He has maybe seen a couple of things here and there. And I was asked, what are your thoughts? And, you know, at the time, I think it was, like in the morning maybe, or I didn't have time to watch it. I was busy. I get around to it. So I ended up watching it that night. And I click on my response right here. So I was about a tenth of the way through. So I'm going to read my tweet right now, just verbatim. Okay, I'm about a tenth of the way in, and I can already tell I fundamentally disagree with this video's point. It feels like he assumes Evangelion is beloved because it deliberately tries to do a lot, rather than serves as something upon which meaning can be applied. And I think that's a very important distinction. I don't think Anno deliberately made a series that has all the meaning people apply to it. I think he did a lot of... I'm going to play some music while I'm going to replay that song while I'm talking, just so you have some audio here. I think Anno tried to do a lot. Obviously, he had a great vision in mind, but I think that Anno did not intend... For example, the religious imagery of Evangelion. And I'm sure the video is going to talk about this too. The religious imagery of Evangelion is entirely superficial. Anno and Gainax had no clue what any of this was. They didn't care about religious imagery. They didn't care about what the Tree of Life meant to the Cabal. They just thought it looked cool, so they put it in. There's no deeper meaning in that sense. But other things like the psychology, the Freudian psychology, the references to science fiction works in the titles of his various episodes, that is deliberate and more intentional. Like the reference to the man who shouted love at the end of the world, something like that, or at the top of his lungs, whatever. At the top, at the peak of the world. It was some title like that, and there's an episode named after that book. They use the word I, because the word for love in Japanese is I. So it's kind of like a little double. And of course, I is the self. And the whole episode focuses on the ego and the sense of self-reflection. So there's a lot of elements at play that I think are really clever. Anyway, so I continue with my response, but RetroBlasting, a couple hours later, responds to this first tweet, which I'm going to read aloud verbatim right now. How about you finish the video before spouting off, or do you regularly come prematurely? In response to feedback to his video. I'm gonna let that sink in for a second there. I'm not typically the kind of person who responds asking about, bodily discharge when responding to reviews, but I guess RetroBlasting has a different perspective on what is acceptable to discuss when meeting someone for the first time than I do. What are you gonna do? So I said, hey, that's kind of rude, but I had another tweet that he responded to. The second tweet in my collection of tweets here is, that is to say, in response to meaning that can be applied to Evangelion, I say, that is to say, he acts as though no one is critical of the series by stress testing it. Okay, so I'm getting myself mixed up here. I continue talking about RetroBlasting's view, but I'd say, no, that is to say, he acts as though, and he being RetroBlaster in this case, no one is critical of the series by stress testing it, but that's also not really the point. The point is that the series is beloved because it forces people to reflect in painful, uncomfortable ways. And I do believe that. I think a lot of people who don't like Evangelion, who have trouble with it, don't enjoy confronting characters who are reflective of themselves in some way, who in many ways may reflect the worst parts of themselves. It's not pleasant, it's not fun to have to confront your own inner demons and go, hey, maybe this says something about me. That sucks. But that's why Evangelion is so powerful. Another reason why I think Catcher in the Rye is a very controversial work, but I think Evangelion's a little more accessible than Catcher in the Rye because, unlike Catcher in the Rye, Evangelion has giant monsters fighting, which is always makes any work better. In response to this, RetroBlasting's responds, and this is where the common comment, okay, that's internet banter or whatever. This is where it got actually angry. And it does not happen too often with me on the internet. I never get angry, but this actually upset me a little bit, and I'll explain why. You're assuming deliberate intent by Anno. I posit that because Anno is mentally ill, nothing he did was deliberate, and therefore by extension has no merit. And anything like merit ascribed to it by fans is a dangerous game to play given Anno's worldview. Now, I'm not going to get into Anno's worldview right now, because I'm sure he explains it in the video that I did not finish. I will get to that. What pissed me off, and I mean genuinely pissed me off, was arguing that because Anno deals with mental illness and depression that can be debilitating, that nothing he did was deliberate and therefore has no merit. If you're approaching the series or any story from the perspective that mental illness keeps you from having artistic merit, then you are an elitist at best. You are condescending at worst, and you are ableist even worse than that. And that pissed me off. There are many artists in this world who have created incredible art while struggling with mental illness, or channel their own pain into their craft. I wonder if he would say the same thing about Van Gogh, dealing with depression. The painting Starry Night was painted from the view, from inside a sanatorium cell. The view of Starry Night is the view Van Gogh saw from his window while getting therapy for his illnesses. And that is infuriating. That this man is saying that because Anno has mental illness, that his art lacks merit. That was enough to make me go, okay. I was on the fence because I'm still trying out this YouTube thing. I'm still seeing where the boundaries are. What is entertaining to you? What you guys would like to see? I don't want to bore you with nonsense. I want to give you guys something fun to watch. I want to earn your views. But at this point, I stopped caring about earning his reviews. I had to articulate exactly why what he's saying infuriated me so deeply. Why I genuinely was upset with this. And I'm not saying this as a fan of Evangelion. I'm saying this as a proponent for artists. I'm saying this as someone who values creativity. This upset me deeply. and it made me have a little less sympathy for RetroBlasting as I review his video. Now, I will be honest with you, I am still going to evaluate his opinion as a separate entity from himself. I'm not going to say, how dare you say this, you person? I'm going to say, oh, the review is incorrect, or I disagree with the review for this reason, or that reason, or the other thing. I'm going to try approaching this with a fair, balanced perspective. I don't want to come across as attacking, and I want to also encourage everyone to watch RetroBlasting's video, because I do not want this live stream to exist as a substitution for the experience of watching his personal review. Now, enough of me talking. I'm going to turn off the music. Two dear friends. Okay, that's valid.
For almost 12 years now, this channel has confronted properties and franchises held dear by children of the 1980s and 90s. That includes a good number of animated shows, with more of those videos in development as I speak. What's sometimes difficult to explain to people who don't create video infotainment is when your personal interests fuel the content you make. Before you know it, your interests that used to be escapes from the daily grind have become the very work that wears you out. That's not to say you end up hating your interests. Far from. What it does accomplish, however, is conditioning my mind to remain in work mode on some level when these movies are on, or when these toys are in front of me. It becomes tough to disconnect and actually relax. In the process of looking for some new pastime that included my love of genre storytelling, while also being something I wouldn't immediately think of as work or want to make into new video content, diversions that would allow me to truly disconnect and rest, I decided it was time to get more familiar with anime.
Okay, I want to pause right here. Yeah, I agree with this point right here. As someone who's worked in the entertainment industry, let me rephrase that. Who has written about the entertainment industry. I've not worked in it. I'm not, well, actually, that's another story. I don't know if the non-disclosure agreements have sailed on that one. But no, I mean, yeah, if your job is responding to media, it can be exhausting. That's why I always try watching dumb stuff all the time. I love watching goofy movies that have no value whatsoever. I was watching Highlander the other night. I love that movie. It's so goofy, but your brain turns off a bit. You don't have to think too hard. But, yeah, if you're critically analyzing film, it can be a lot.
I had a list of names that had been rattling around in my memory for 20 years or more, but no clue what they were about. I felt this would be a good strategy for picking out shows to enjoy.
Wait a second. Hang on a second here. So we have a list of anime DVDs, right? You got Patlabor, Perfect Blue, Macross, Akira, Cyber City 808, and Pet Girl. Right next to Cowboy Bebop and Ghost in the Shell. I love it. Love it. That is the anime experience in a nutshell. Having high art next to the goofiest stuff. Anyway, I digress.
Be a journey into the unknown that would finally put faces with names, so to speak. So I made my choice with the name of a series I'd heard mentioned the most over the past 25 years. This was going to be the beginning of a new way for me to relax when not making videos for the channel. I was excited. I'd found the solution. The Blu-ray set arrived and I began to watch what I hoped would be the first of many fun and relaxing anime series in my spare time. The series was Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Well, that sounds like a you problem, buddy.
Expectations would I have believed a piece of media I have no history with whatsoever would demand a response I desperately hoped would already be on YouTube. In fact, I spent many hours searching for that response. I consumed every shred of content about Evangelion on YouTube, from the endless videos lavishing this series with unrestrained praise to the few outliers who had the courage to say this story wasn't famous but infamous. In doing so, I did learn without question that Evangelion's reputation as a contender for the most worshipped anime isn't an exaggeration. There was no shortage of varieties to which this production has been complimented by its fans, ranging from your run-of-the-mill, I relate to this story's emotions so much, fanboy feels vids, to full-on Ivy League grade attempts to academically validate Evangelion as a work of existential genius. Evangelion has, by many of its fans, been vehemently labeled high art. Others call out its compelling storytelling. Others call it a masterful exercise in self-exploration by the series' creator of his own philosophical perspectives on existence. Others say that Evangelion is definitively a deliberate metatextual deconstruction of both anime and the mecha subgenre, while others claim it is an allegory steeped in Christian iconography, using this profound symbolism to create a narrative rich in deliberate subtext. Others say Evangelion is mecha anime used as a mirror, held up to anime fans and the anime industry in an attempt to teach fans the importance of not letting escapism consume them from reality, and warn the anime industry that it needs to steer away from its own creative stagnation. I think...
Okay, how many of those did I say at the beginning of the stream? I mean, I forgot he said lifted all those out. Like, yeah, he kind of read us like a fiddle in that sense. But no, like, it's because this is the reading that people have of the series. Do I believe that Hideaki Anno conceived of all these interpretations simultaneously when making Evangelion? No. I don't believe he intentionally did all that. I think he couldn't help but do that. Often, meaning in art is ascribed after its creation, right? I'm saying we like I'm some big artist, but like artists have been said many times that, they have intentionality in like the editing and the revamping of the story, but often meaning is relayed without intention. I always think of George Romero with Night of the Living Dead. He insisted until his dying day that the reason why he casted a black actor in the lead role of Night of the Living Dead was because he was the best guy to show up to the audition. And as they were finishing the film, and they put the film in the back of their car, they were driving to distribute the film, when on the radio they heard that MLK had just passed away, had just been assassinated. Meaning was put upon that film. It was not intentional. It was prescribed to the film. So I don't believe artists have to intentionally put meaning in a story. And you can apply any number of meaning to a narrative. Applicability is often more powerful than allegory. I don't know what Evangelion is allegorical for, aside from Freudian psychology. But I do know that it is one of the most applicable anime of all time because of the deeply personal place from which Anno drew when making it, is in my opinion.
I think it goes without saying that a series cannot be all of these things simultaneously, no matter how perfect its devotees believe it to be. What can be said with certainty is that all fans of Evangelion think they know exactly what the meaning of the series is, while refusing to admit no two individuals can agree on the exact meaning itself. Every one of Evangelion's fans seems ready to fight any and every voice of dissent, but through their own varied content they reveal they are a large, loud group that have no idea what they're fighting for.
See, that I don't like. I don't like that. I don't like it how you criticize the fans. I think that's very frustrating to watch because you're basically saying that no one knows what Evangelion's about, but they're all arguing over it. Well, how do you know? Because everyone has their own interpretation. Are you saying that everyone's interpretation is invalid? You have to argue that interpretation specifically. A story like Evangelion, again, like I said, is very applicable. It is not allegorical. You apply meaning to it. There's a famous Tolkien quote from one of the prefaces to Lord of the Rings, where he says he hates allegory in all of its forms, but then praises applicability. And that Tolkien will argue, I didn't write Lord of the Rings based on World War II, but you can easily apply World War II themes to Lord of the Rings. The book's not about that, but you can apply it. Again, I think by saying what is the singular meaning of Evangelion, you are doing it wrong. It's not one meaning. It's several different meanings to different people because the way the art is designed, people can interpret it in different ways. I think that's a more interesting conversation than finding the one meaning. It's saying, hey, what did this art mean to you, the audience? Because once a work of art is out there, it's out there. It no longer belongs to the director solely. It is the interpretation of the audience. And their interpretation, they can argue it. If the argument is poorly phrased, you can argue against it. But it's still an interpretation. They can apply whatever meaning they want. I mean, some are better than others. And I'll argue if I disagree. But your opinion's valid. And what does criticizing the fans have to do with the work? Nothing. It has nothing to do with the work. And that's why I took issue with this. Anyway.
Let's take pronunciation as the merest of examples. You may have noticed I've been pronouncing Evangelion with a hard E at the front, but I'm using a hard G in the middle despite the word angel being the central word of the title. I've done this up until this point to see how many Ava fans' heads have exploded already. Many
None.
fans of this
No one
series
cares.
argue the word
It's
should
not a
be
big deal,
pronounced Ava. You know, like Ava Gardner, whose name started with an A and not an E, but whatever. So according to a lot of the fans, the word should be Evangelion, but it isn't agreed on.
Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Love 1 hour photo.
These are probably the... What I find most interesting is twofold. One, all of their positions of admiration for Evangelion are couched in a stance of justifications. A cannon blast of fan gushing, word salads of the same praises parroted from other Evangelion fan reviews, and semantic smokescreens in the hopes that any critic will be too confused to parse their verbiage for the flaws in their approach, and instead take their comments at face value without question. And two, not a single positive reviewer I've seen in the many hours of watching these reviews and historical breakdowns of the series ever takes a position that confronts the material. And by that I don't necessarily mean aims to be critical or dislike the production, simply confronting the work in a manner that stress tests this allegedly perfect anime series and proves it is deserving of these merits. In other words, try to take their emotions out of it as much as possible. Ask me to objectively...
I can assure you they never watched Trash Taste podcasts then. Of all the hours. Like, I mean, come on. Like, I have been on Evangelion forums. They will shit talk the series until the sun goes down. Tons of people criticize Evangelion. It is the most controversial anime for a reason.
Explain why I believe Lawrence of Arabia is an incredible feat of narrative filmmaking, and I can put the screws to it rather than pull the fanboy Hadouken of emotional pontification. David Lean's film will survive that level of scrutiny, even with its flaws laid bare. That's how solid a creation it is in film history. While, as I said, I have seen people bravely step forward and say, I don't like Evangelion, and as for why its detractors haven't taken aim and fired effectively, I'm starting to believe it's because in order to do so, in the case of Evangelion, we find ourselves in the rare position of having to all but ignore the story of the series entirely and take aim at the creator himself, Hideaki Anno. Normally, I'm one to criticize the quality of the...
I'm a little confused here. Let me go back a second. I want to make sure I heard him correctly with this one.
And as for why its detractors haven't taken aim and fired effectively, I'm starting to believe it's because in order to do so, in the case of Evangelion, we find ourselves in the rare position of having to all but ignore the story of the series entirely and take aim at the creator himself, Hideaki Anno.
Why? If you're criticizing a show, criticize the show. Why would you have to attack the creator? If you're analyzing the product of the creator, why would you address the concerns towards the creator? It's not like a Marquis de Sade situation where the guy was a violent person. Or, you know, we're talking like a guy who made an anime. Why would you direct your attacks on the creator and not analyze the show itself? Why would you ignore the story?
Of the writing, the logic problems of the plot, and leave the people out of it by and large. But here you practically have to throw the script away because, well, that's exactly what Anno did during the making of Neon Genesis Evangelion.
That is true.
The reason behind why he tossed the script isn't as banal and straightforward as his fans like to tell us. The reality is extremely uncomfortable, having everything to do with why Evangelion is always defended and justified rather than confronted the way it should be. But before we go there, what about that script?
Okay, so what I think he's going to talk about right now is the initial pitch for Evangelion that was released. The initial pitch was very different for Evangelion versus the version that we got. Now, as I understand it, keyword, as I understand it, budgeting was one factor why they didn't film that exact script. They were created. The funding was pulled apparently at a certain point while making the show. There were some creative divisions. Gainax was already in a financially bad situation before the show even started. For them, it was very much like a Final Fantasy Squaresoft situation where if this didn't work, they might have gone under.
I'm not going to waste your time trying to point out the hundreds of plot holes and all of the story's logic problems as I often do with other series or films, because when you get right down to the facts of the case, the sci-fi plot didn't matter to Anno, so why should it matter to the viewer? The series...
Okay, I actually do agree with you on something. The sci-fi plot is less important to Anno than the exploration of its characters. That is why the last 2 episodes of Evangelion are fully focused on characterization. The focus was always on the characters. It was always a coming of age. It was always a psychological exploration of its... It was a character study. That is what people don't get about Evangelion. The show is less concerned with the external plot and very focused on the internal plot. And that is why it is so difficult for many people to grapple with it. It is a show that doesn't really care about how the external plot resolves itself, because it's so concerned at a certain point with the internal plot. That is, I think... I would argue that is an imperfection of the series, but it's an imperfection that makes the show better, I think, in my opinion. I think that by ignoring the external and focusing purely on the internal, it creates something very artistically powerful. But that is my opinion. I'm not expecting everyone else to agree with that, and I fully get if someone was annoyed with how the show kind of drops the external conflict after a certain point. How, like, Toji just vanishes from the storyline after his subplot ends. I get that, but I think it results in a very powerful piece of media. But I digress.
The series begins with a setup anyone who has seen your basic mecha cartoon should understand. If you've seen Voltron, you've seen the basic premise.
If you've seen the show where they travel to space and rescue space princesses, you know the series about the post-apocalyptic wasteland of Tokyo 3. Makes sense.
Called The Second Impact, almost destroyed life on Earth. The world is in peril from these strange kaiju-like monsters. Nerve is run by this supreme asshole named Gendo Ikari, who is apparently the sociopath inventor of the Evas. Mecha robot.
He's not the inventor of the Evas, though. He runs Nerve. He didn't make the Evas. Okay, whatever.
Bots that are partially biological and solely designed to combat the arriving angels. Decided they needed to send a crew to Antarctica, led by Gendo, to attempt to fuse human DNA with this long-dormant atom entity. This causes the mass...
It's not led by Gendo, though. It's led by Misato's dad. Because he dies. Also, most of this backstory is only acknowledged in the PlayStation 2 game. And even then, I wouldn't say this is an exact one-to-one of the PlayStation 2 game's files explanation of the plot. Or was it PSP? I forget. It was one of those consoles. Because it doesn't matter. None of this matters. None of this is relevant to the plot of Evangelion, because no one cares where Adam came from, or where Lilith came from, unless you're like a complete lore nerd. The only thing that matters is that second impact happens. It destroys life. Half the planet is wiped off of the face of the Earth. And now, to prevent a third impact, they have to stop the angels. The angels are, in essence, alternate versions of what humanity could be if their AT fields didn't separate them into individual beings, yes. But that's not really relevant. This is why I can't stand some of the lore dumps you see in, like, stories. Because it's like, yeah, lore is important, but it's not always relevant to the conflicts of the characters. But again, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? All right, let's keep going.
Massive cataclysm called the Second Impact, which Sele wanted to happen because it was predicted in those Dead Sea Scrolls or something. Billions of people die, the Earth's climate is in tatters, the angels are finally appearing because Zele awakened Adam, and they are hell-bent at wiping out the humans, so the Earth will finally be the planet it was always intended to be. Meanwhile, Zele...
No, you're incorrect. They are not intent on destroying humanity. For the first several angels, they don't even acknowledge people until humans attack them first. What the angels want to do is reunite with Adam, that they think is under central dogma in the Geofront. They want to reunite with their creator in the same way that people want to come close to each other. But in coming close to each other, that results in pain. It's like one of the central tenets of the series, that the closer we come together, the more pain we cause each other in some ways. But again, That's a thematic element that is only directly spelled out in the third episode of the show, but just a few
through
steps.
something they call the Human Instrumentality Project, and then merge Adam and Lilith so humans can become part of God.
Alright, so you mixed a few steps up. They have to fuse Adam and Lilith before the Human Instrumentality Project, but again, the thing about Seele that is important for people to understand for Evangelion, if you want to like Evangelion, you got to appreciate one cool key central thing. Seele doesn't really fucking matter. They really don't. Yeah, this external plot is what drives the series, but it's not really about the external plot. It's about the characters, how they respond to this cosmic horror. It's like reading, again, using Lovecraft as an example, reading Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu and going, yeah, you know, what's Cthulhu's backstory? How did he get here? Doesn't matter. What matters is he's there and he's causing pain. His existence creates nightmares for humanity. The angels, Adam, Lilith, Seele, human instrumentality, what they pose to the story is like a cosmic horror story. They themselves, what makes them there, really doesn't matter. It's interesting, yes, from a lore perspective. It is interesting. I looked all this stuff up when I first watched Eva, obsessively to make it make sense. But my conclusion ultimately was, none of this matters. It does not matter to the focus of the series. The core conflict of the series is ultimately the human story in the face of cosmic horror, not the cosmic horror in face of the human story. If you're trying to make sense of a cosmic horror story, you're already doing it wrong. Because the less sense it makes, the more impactful it is upon its protagonists. Constantly, Shinji, Misato, Asuka, even Rei, their reaction to anything outside of their parameters is, I don't know what's happening. And that's great writing. Because why would they know anything? Even if they dug into it, why would it make sense to them? When Misato explains the plot of Eva to Shinji in End of Evangelion, it sounds like ridiculous, because it is ultimately not something that means makes sense.
The main plot of the story is about Gendo's son, Shinji,
There we go,
who
finally.
has no relationship with his father after his mother Yui, who was a scientist with nerve, was in some accident working on the Eva mechas and died. Gendo, who if I haven't mentioned it already, is a massive asshole, doesn't care about his son at all and just wants him to pilot this mecha called an Eva and risk his life to defend Tokyo 3 from the Angels. Shinji is a broken nothing burger of a character, hopeless, scared, self-centered to the extreme, emotionally needy, and an absolute pill.
I knew it.
So he's not a nothing burger then. Quite frankly, like, he's a nothing burger. He has all these complex emotions. He's a nothing burger. Okay, whatever.
No one wants me.
Be a man for once! Grow some balls!
Emo doesn't even begin to describe him. Shinji is a trash
Emo.
human
Never
born
heard that
from
one
another
before.
trash
Ikari.
human. He's an up-and-coming narcissistic sequel to his father, and yet for some reason, an entire generation of people claim they like and relate to this walking participation trophy of a character.
Yes, it is the point that he is like his father. They both are the same person, essentially. Gendo is what Shinji could become if he So the whole thing with Gendo's whole plot, as you find out at the end of Evangelion, is he wants to reunite with Yui. He pushed others out of his life because they made him uncomfortable. Because the knowing of people, they caused him pain. It was the Hedgehog's dilemma all over again. This is explicitly stated in the show. It's not a theory. It's just he outright admits it. He accepts his fate when it comes to him because he admits that he was a massive, awful person. Gendo represents what Shinji could be if he allowed his anxieties to become callous, to become faults, to become issues. It's good writing. It's a foil between two different characters to show how certain decisions can impact someone on their way to advancement, to growth. How selfishness can result in you wanting to destroy the world. In fact, Shinji does ultimately destroy the world, to an extent, at the end of Evangelion. Much like Gendo would destroy the world to be back with Yui. That is how it works. That is the narrative of the story.
The world would be infinitely better off if both of them were put in a catapult and thrown into the sun. And yet somehow in this story, these two living devils are going to decide the fate of all life on Earth. That is, if anyone can get Shinji to pilot the Eva.
I can't do this! So what happens if I tell you I've decided I don't want to pilot Unit 1? I never want to pilot Neva again.
Stand up!
Okay, so there is a gap of 18 episodes between some of these shots. Yeah, episode 4, Shinji doesn't want to pilot the Eva because he's traumatized by it. Yeah, episode 1, he doesn't want to pilot the Eva because he just got there. Episode 19, he doesn't want to pilot the Eva because he just brutally beat the snot out of his best friend who was being driven by an Eva, and his dad forced him to do it. There is a period of time where Shinji is very fine with running into his Eva, and everyone always overlooks that. And by the time End of Eva happens, he just had to murder the only person who showed him love in his bare fingers. Yeah. He's not going to want to pilot the robot. It's a trauma machine for him. He doesn't want to pilot the robot at his lowest points in the narrative. He's missing a few key points of this criticism. I don't know why. We'll find out.
Some people see this as...
Now, let me point one thing out too before you criticize me for saying, oh, how dare you dislike something I like. No, you're allowed to dislike Shinji. He's a very problematic character. He's a mess. He's a character that people cannot stand for very good reasons. Even though I think that his criticisms specifically are oversimplifying the character. If you don't like Shinji, that's fine. You're allowed not to like the character. That's how fiction works. If this character does not work for you, okay. Don't watch the show. That's what I tell you. You'll know very quickly if you want to punch Shinji into the moon. If you don't like the character, don't watch it. No one's forcing you to watch a show with a character you can't stand. But if you do like him, I personally think Shinji's a very interesting character. He is not my favorite character in the show, but I think he's a very compelling protagonist because of his flaws. Only problem is people think that flaws have to be fun. They have to be a dark, edgy hero who, like the Punisher. They can't be someone who's profoundly depressed and profoundly over his head and dealing with cosmic horror and never given the time to even communicate with someone else. The closest person he has is Asuka, who bullies him constantly.
Here's the thing. All of us have experienced trauma of one form or another, and all of us have had bad people do bad things to us in our lives. But I would rather die than ever accept Shinji as my representative for buying groceries, to say nothing of considering him to represent me in a desperate battle against incredible odds. And look, it isn't wrong to feel weak or feel scared or have doubts, but going so far as to see yourself as Shinji Ikari, a character that allows his fears to utterly cripple and control him, that allows his insecurities to torment and abuse the people around him, that's not profound. That's pathetic.
You're missing the point. Profoundly. People don't want to relate to Shinji. They are compelled to relate to Shinji. Because Shinji is their worst aspects made abundantly clear. You are not supposed to want to be Shinji. You are supposed to think, oh God, if I was in a situation, would I do any different? You would want to do different. You would want to be the hero. You'd want to be the champion. But the horrifying element of Shinji Ikari is that most people, if they were put in a situation, they would be even worse. And that is why he is so compelling of a character. He is not the character you want to be. He is the character that you will be. And that's why it's horrible and great. Relating is not a choice. Relating is sometimes a necessity. It is a cruel, uncomfortable reality that a show will force you to realize, oh God, this would be me in this situation, and I don't like it. And that is why it's compelling. It is unpleasant. It is horrible. It is, I think, one reason why a lot of people do not like Shinji, because they realize, oh God, this would be me. It's not me. I personally relate to Asuka and Misato. And that's also bad, but for totally different reasons. But Shinji is a character who, if you relate to, it is not by choice. It is because, oh God, this would be me. And that is bad. That is why. He is a cautionary tale, more so than anything else. He is not a hero to aspire to. He is the hero that you will be. And by hero, I mean protagonist. Anyway.
In situations like these, I don't know how to respond or act.
Smiling would be a good start.
Oh, no, he didn't.
This character is bad, and you should objectively feel bad about yourself if you hold him up as an example for your own life.
Exactly. That is the point.
Oh, no, he
You just
didn't.
got to the point of the
Heroes
character.
have their doubts in stories all the time, whether we're talking about Luke Skywalker from Star Wars or Hikaru in Macross. Luke Skywalker found out his father was a piece of shit too, and Hikaru wouldn't stop pining for Min-Mei. But neither of these characters, despite preferring a different set of circumstances for their lives, ever shirked their responsibilities.
Unless you mean The Last Jedi. Oh! Sorry, couldn't resist that one.
That's not a good message to send to troubled people, especially troubled teens. Lean into your weaknesses. Wallow in your self-absorption. Never move from the egomaniacal position that you are the most important person in the universe. Don't ever dig deep and find that strength inside yourself to be better. Drain everyone else in your life like an emotional vampire. There is no bigger picture. There's only you. And we wonder why the children of the 21st century are so enslaved to their individual feelings and obsessed with the nature of their personal identities at the expense of everything else. Because shows like Evangelion came along and told them all of this is totally valid. And that doesn't begin to cover the—
Oh yeah, no, that's it. If you crack the code on the problems of millennials, it's Evangelion. That caused it. Okay, that's also not what the point of Shinji's character arc is. For one, Shinji has a positive arc until episode 16. The halfway point of the series is where Shinji descends into a tragic spiral, an emotional tailspin. How I interpret that. Now I'm going to speak from interpretation. At this point, I'm going to give my interpretation of the series. I'm not going to act like this is definitely the point of the show. But from my perspective, the idea is this. We see Shinji grow. We see Shinji get a support unit. We see him become friends with people. Again, Toji, Kensuke, Rei, Misato, especially Asuka. Asuka's where he has a lot of assertiveness grow. I noticed that he's avoided mentioning Asuka this entire time outside of the person he pines for and then strangles. But didn't mention the coma scene, but I digress. The moment these support systems are stripped from him, he collapses because he values his essence on other people. He cements his sense of self-worth to those around him. This is explicitly said in many of the Hell train sequences. When Toji's gone, he refuses to pilot for the first time in like a dozen episodes. When Asuka is horribly tortured, he starts to tailspin even further. Rei 2's gone, tailspins further. When he has to kill Kaoru, the one person who's shown him love, he reaches his lowest point. The idea of the end of Evangelion is to show that other people do not make you happy. By removing the boundaries between yourself and others, you actually make yourself worse by demanding their affection and love. Shinji only undoes instrumentality because he tries to figure out how to find value in his own being, to allow people to become separate again. However, the point of the end of the episode of the series, in my honest opinion, is this. This is the core message, I think, of the end of Evangelion. Just because you chose to have a breakthrough, because you chose to heal, it does not make the world magically better. It does not undo the damage you've done. You have to deal with the consequences of your actions. And others still have the right to be repulsed by you. But maybe, if you're lucky, someone can show you love and affection. Maybe. That is why Evangelion, I think, is very profound. It is a show that, in my personal interpretation of the show, deals with mental health in a very intelligent way. You can improve. But that does not mean the world around you will, or will ever forgive you for what you did. And that is profound and powerful, I think.
The rest of this plot, which involves a heartless man in Gendo who will use up anyone and everyone, including his son, as well as sleeping with a co-worker and eventually that woman's own daughter after he drives the mother to suicide, By the way, he ultimately murders the daughter as well. That shouldn't come as a surprise. This story is the equivalent of staring into the mouth of madness. You've got Shinji's guardian and nerve official Misato, who is considered one of the hottest women in Tokyo 3, but when her old boyfriend is killed by agents of Seilei, even though she could have any man in the city to stave off the loneliness and despair, she attempts to sleep with the underage Shinji late in the series. Ultimately, Misato will make out with...
Okay. Let's hold off a second here. That scene is out of context here. The thing is, Misato's whole thing is that she has, for years, used sex as an emotional crutch for her own problems. She's used her sexual appetites and sexual relations with others as a means to distract from her own pain. In that one instance, she reacts on instinct. And it is immediately repulsed by it. Does that make it right? No. God, no. It's still screwed up. It's so screwed up on so many levels. But in that scene in episode 23, something like that, she immediately is so repulsed by her action, she runs away and doesn't talk to Shinji for several more episodes of the show. Because she sees herself as a danger to him as well. This scene right here, where Shinji and Misato kiss, is very well known. It's a scene where she kisses Shinji to distract him long enough to shove him in an elevator. Are there edible implications here? I would say probably. It's very obvious, I think, in some cases. Is it necessarily Shinji... But is this scene for Misato's benefit or for Shinji's? Is this Misato giving Shinji what she thinks that he wants, or is Misato acting on her own desires? That is something... Or is it a combination of the two? Or is it neither, and just a distraction to keep him, to save his life? Or is she dying of blood loss and just makes a dumb decision based on lack of blood flowing to her brain? Your mileage will vary. But again, I think it's worth mentioning these interpretations. This is why Evangelion is so interesting, this discussion to be had. Do I subscribe to the theory that Misato is a pedo? No, I do not. I think that Misato reacts to any stimuli that's troubling with sex. But when she's aware of what she's doing, she realizes, oh God, what am I doing? This is really screwed up. And does that make her a good moral character? No. It makes her a complex one. One that's troubled, one that struggles, one that is profoundly pathetic in some cases. Which is, again, the point of Evangelion. These characters are supposed to be morally screwed up, emotionally screwed up, and psychologically screwed up. And that's the point. But again, that's a complex discussion. Obviously, this is not here for complex discussion.
With him and promises him sex upon his return from the final battle in the film that revises the ending of the story. There is nothing about Shinji, messed up underage situation aside, that would compel a woman like Misato to keep making advances on him. You've also got Rei, a strange girl who seems distant and inhuman. She was the first Eva pilot, and Shinji feels an immediate connection.
Couldn't help
eventually
yourself,
learn she's a hybrid clone.
Couldn't help
Shit.
yourself with the fucking
Sorry.
Star Wars
Let me
thing,
try
could
that
you?
again. You've also got Rei. Finally, there's Asuka, an initially brash Eva pilot with an overly combative personality that you quickly learn is the only character worth investing in, because despite her own psychological baggage stemming from finding her mother's hanging body after she committed suicide, Asuka channels that rage into courage under fire and a willingness to take the fight to the angels.
Okay. Even though you are praising the character I like the most in the show by a vast mile, I disagree with you, Reed. It's not courage that drives her. It is profound insecurity. Intense insecurity. Some of the worst insecurity in the entire show. Because she values her entire existence on her performance. She only values herself if she does a good job. Because like a talented and gifted youngster who falls into deep depression if he or she doesn't get an A. I'm speaking for myself there, aren't I? Doesn't get an A on your English test. Her entire sense of self, the entire foundation of her self-worth is grounded on whether or not she is good at what she does. Not just good, but the best. And if she's not the best, if you ain't first, you're last in her eyes. She is one of the greatest characters in this show because of how profoundly tragic that is. She only finds value when, in the will to fight on her own, in this scene specifically, when she realizes that she was always loved. It's so sad. It's so pathetic. It's so tragic. But it is one of the greatest elements of the character, and then ultimately it blows up in her face. Another reason why I think the manga kind of fails in that sense, I think it subdues a lot of the elements that are so profound in this original series. And the big reason I'm not a fan of the rebuild films as much is because of how much Asuka's role is sidelined in that series. There is so much I can say about Asuka. I could do a 5-hour video just about Asuka. There is so much I could say about this character. Of anything. I've written a lot of pieces on Evangelion. I've been trying to pitch an article about writing about Asuka every single time I've ever pitched to any publication. That is how much I love this character. I think she is a fantastically written character. Like one of the best characters in anime, in my honest opinion. But I can go into that at a later date. It looks like, based on this runtime, it looks like, we're only halfway through this video. Wow, I am dragging this out. I'm very sorry. I just saw a comment talking about Tiffany Grant. Yeah, that's one thing about okay. The one thing I was actually really upset when they recast. I think, with Shinji it worked out, but with, I can't hear Asuka without Tiffany Grant and her. And again, I got a lot of people get angry at me about this whole translation thing, and just directly translating the text. Ava is improved by Tiffany Grant's improvised German. I'm just pointing that out right now. It really helps to have a character who is German speak German. Who'd have thunk it? Anyway.
Dead Sea Scrolls. I used to know this lunatic in real life who claimed the government was watching her and was secretly in control of every aspect of her average humdrum existence. Evangelion's plot reads just like one of her ramblings, where you have a big secret society that is pulling all of these puppet strings toward some darker end they are keeping from the other trillion people on Earth, and somehow they have the power to do these things. Meanwhile, there's a bevy of emotionally broken people all constantly spouting their laments about the meaning of existence and their feelings of loneliness, while unrelated symbols upon symbols are mixed into the narrative that point toward completely different alleged thematic ideas that don't really relate to the other portions of the story. It's all manic and superfluous and stacked atop one another like a tower of soggy pancakes. And then when you add in the narcissism, the incel behavior, the pedophilia, the Oedipal complex fixations, and so much more that couldn't fit into a full set of encyclopedias, you start to see the real nature of the man behind this madness. A true Russell Nash grade personality in Hideaki Anno who is dashing in his mind from one mental anxiety to the next as he grapples with trying to make a story about sci-fi mecha action while his noisy brain torments him with all of these personal hang-ups about loneliness, resentment, a desperate want for attention and validation from others, and on and on and on.
So that's actually not true. Anno was going to therapy in the second half of the show and drew from therapy into the narrative of this. The common misconception is that Anno went wild in the second half. It's actually not true. He was more unstable in the first half, which is more straightforward and stable. It was when he started to self-reflect that you really saw things deviate. But again, Hideaki Anno had basically a decade and a half of a career before making Evangelion. Evangelion was not his first project. He worked with Hayao Miyazaki. To this day, Hayao Miyazaki, he's one of the few people in the world who will tease Hayao Miyazaki and Miyazaki not get mad at him. Anno is extremely experienced as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. Everything he did was he chose everything. Every creative decision he made was by design. He wasn't like an unstable maniac. He chose to make a story about paranoia. He chose to make a story about emotional pain, to reflect on what he was self-reflecting with himself. This is not... If you want to talk about a film made by someone who is losing a grasp on reality, or a story like that, you'll find stuff where they aren't so directly and deliberate about their imagery. You'll find something more vague and abstract. Evangelion is vague and abstract, but it's also very deliberately vague and abstract. Its choices are very precise. Its imagery is very controlled. And you can tell that because he does so much with so little. The last 2 episodes are just repeated cells of animation, and he tells an entire narrative as a result of that. But I digress.
The result is all of the characters are totally shitty, both within the story and on the page as a writing exercise. This story is not brilliantly bonkers, but toxically bonkers, because Anno psychologically cannot get out of his own way. Not only is he completely self-absorbed as a person because of his mental illness, he is incapable at this stage in his crumbling mental stability of taking himself out of the story he's writing, so that the narrative will work as a piece of coherent, valuable, and entertaining storytelling. It's a level
refuses to take himself out of the narrative. If you take the artist out of the art, what's left of the art? If you take the artist out of the narrative, what left is there? What are you going to use? What is there after you take the artist out of the art? You have a product. You want a product is what you want. You want easily consumable genre fiction. Well, there's other stories for you then. Anno's even made them. Evangelion is not about genre sci-fi. It's about a guy who's dealing with his struggles, channeling his struggles into art. It's a human narrative that you seem to want to see. But I digress.
Level of narcissism that is tragic to witness. Despite what Evangelion defenders claim, that this ending is exactly what Anno wanted, Anno would go on to redo these 2 episodes a year later to massively change the conclusion of the story. And then...
Now, I will say this. The original episode plan was very different. I have read the original pitch for Evangelion. It's available online. You can find it pretty easily. It's basically like a rough outline of the whole series. It involved subaquatic cities rising to the surface. There were some ideas there that were never actually actualized. It was a lot of wild stuff. Vague elements that were... Some elements did make the translation. Again, the first half of the original pitch is close-ish to what we got in the show. But budgetary restrictions, budgetary expenditures, because again, Evangelion's a clearly expensive series. Possibly a little bit of Gainax smudging their numbers a little bit for, let's just say, a few of the members of Gainax have done some things that aren't exactly great, legally. There's a possibility some of it might have been embezzled. I'm not saying that, but it's a possibility. But yeah, Anno was given a small deck, but he felt sad. But what's important isn't that he planned this in the beginning. What's important is Anno felt satisfied with the ending he produced. He did not want to make End of Evangelion. In fact, his contempt for his audience is all over End of Evangelion. The opening scene is basically him saying, "Oh yeah, you wanted Shinji and Asuka to get together. I got you getting together right here." Yeah, Again, that's not how he became a guy from New Jersey apparently just now, but I digress. Anno was not happy making End of Evangelion, but he did make it. So, you can't say End of Evangelion is proof that the episodes were not what he wanted to make. You just can't. You could. Actually, you could say that. You just did. But you can't make a convincing argument that that's the case. But again, as I've said 100 times already, I digress.
Then wait another few years and redo the entire story again with the rebuild films. If Anno felt like he got it right the first time, if his ending was as confidently arrived at as his fans like to claim, he wouldn't have spent his entire career remaking this story over and over. Obsessively remaking the same thing again and again is manic behavior.
Show me all the blueprints. 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 Show me all the blueprints.
Anno is like the...
You're acting like Anno only made Evangelion. Seriously. Karikano was made, I think, alongside Evangelion. He did live-action films between End of Evangelion and Rebuild. He remade Cutie Honey. Between episodes... It was a decade chunk of time between the third rebuild film and the last rebuild film because he made a Godzilla movie in between there. The guy didn't just make Eva all the time. It was more that people wanted him to keep making Eva. That's like saying, why did George Lucas make Star Wars for his entire career and never made anything else? Oh wait, he did. Indiana Jones and Willow. He was made to do Star Wars because people wanted him to make Star Wars until he made Star Wars and people didn't like him making it. And now people want him to do it again. It's ridiculous. Again, it's complicated because it's clear Anno did do other things to varying levels of success. I think Shin Godzilla is an incredible movie, an incredible accomplishment. I think aside from Godzilla Minus One, it is the best modern Godzilla film. But if all you're looking at in Anno's career is just when he made Eva, yeah, it's going to look a lot like he repeats himself because you're ignoring everything else. But again,
Howard Hughes of anime, a mentally ill tornado that society has been hoodwinked into worshipping as genius. But Anno is of course just another in a long line of lunatics in human history that were given the red carpet treatment. And like those before him, he wasted all kinds of time and mountains of resources making his spruce goose of an anime that really doesn't fly that well at all, but continues to get praise and attention for the scope of how unconventional it is, with no acknowledgement of its equal level of uselessness. Instead, Eva fans tried to encourage me to watch all of the revisions to the story, saying how the revisions address these many issues and make the story better. There's a problem with their logic. It's these people that made the original series with all of those admitted flaws successful in the first place, before a single revision was attempted. By saying I should watch these revisions, they're admitting the original idea is broken, but they watched it and devoted themselves to it anyway. When I tell people to watch The Empire Strikes Back or Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, I never tell them to watch the special editions of those films. The original versions are what should be seen. They weren't broken ideas that needed repair. And in those well-known instances where the original vision was hijacked by the producers before release, such as with The Big Red One or Kingdom of Heaven, seeing the director's cut is seeing the original version before it was broken by outside forces. This was not the case with Anno's Evangelion. He made the story he wanted to make, and the audience wasn't happy. By some accounts, Anno was resentful of the backlash his final 2 episodes received, and that the revised movie ending titled End of Evangelion was Anno's thumb in the eye to the audience. However, Anno would also say in later interviews that he felt his original ending did not do the story justice and needed to be fixed. Getting a straight answer out of Anno is about as easy as getting a straight answer out of his screenplays. It isn't going to happen. The man is a psychological wreck, and that man is where people should be looking when discussing this series, not in empty symbolism, convoluted plotting, and revision films that serve only to insert his wife into the story while doubling down on the sexualization of underage girls and dialing up to 20 the absolute uselessness of Shinji Ikari.
So, let me break this down a second here. First off, I don't know any Evangelion fans who recommend Rebuild over the original series, personally. I think a lot of Rebuild fans exist, but I think the original is much better. Yeah, Mari is implied to be Anno's wife. By the way, Anno's wife has a really interesting manga about living with Hideaki Anno, and it's equal parts reverent and equal parts just taking the piss out of him. It is a great read. There is some scenes in that manga that my wife and I still talk about because of just how goofy, where it's babe, if I ever get this bad, just punch me. But again, this is a fact of matter. This is a matter of fact. Anno is a weird dude. He's an odd dude. Let's get that out of the way. He's a strange guy. He's a nerd. He's a little dorky. He's wonky. But he's not clinically insane. Well, sorry, legally insane, I should say. He's not out of his mind. He's erratic. He's wonky. He's goofy. But and maybe he's a I don't know the guy personally. He could be a jerk. I don't know. I never met him. Never hung out with him. What I'm saying is, the way that this guy's talking about Hideaki Anno, you'd think he was a raving lunatic. You think he was Hannibal Lecter. You think he was just out of his mind. Yeah, what do you think of David Lynch? David Lynch is way weirder than Anno. Honestly, the thing about a lot of Anno's contemporaries, Tomino and stuff like that, is they'll argue that Anno is more business-oriented. than they are. That they're more artists. Anno is more of a businessman who wants to, well, not a businessman, but like a producer. More of a producer. He wants to bring his ideas to life, but he doesn't always enjoy the act of making them. That's what people have said. I'm not saying that myself. It's not my opinion, but that's the opinion of his contemporaries. Anno is not unstable. In fact, he made a rebuild of Eva when he was more stable, more over his intense crippling depression, debilitating depression. Also, depression is not schizophrenia. It's not paranoid delusions. It's a sense of worthlessness. Evangelion is his process of understanding depression, of his understanding of his own mental, emotional issues. By acting as though Anno is somehow raving mad because he wants to make a show about depression, that he wants to make a story about, hey, this made me miserable, I want to articulate it in art. There is something really, really strange about this review. And I don't just mean it as in like, oh, I disagree with it. Because I do disagree with it. And I'm hyperactive online because I think it's entertaining to watch. But this is profoundly uncomfortable to me to watch. Because it feels as though he is saying that if you are mentally unwell, if you have issues that you want to articulate in art, and you have control of that art, and it is an original thing you made it, you have created every component of the story, and you want to make a piece of art that reflects your own personal turmoil, you are morally wrong for doing so. I see a lot of people online where they'll argue in the face of, like, let's say LGBTQ representation. They'll say, hey, listen, we don't want you gaying up our Disney movie. Go make your own thing. Okay, Anno made his own thing. He made his own story. This is his own narrative, and people liked it. Now you're mad at him for making his own thing the way he wanted to? You're mad at the creator for taking creative control and telling the story they want to make? And then saying that, well, when he revised it because of popular demand, that wasn't Anno just bending the public opinion or the company, which has ownership of the idea after he made it, telling him to make more of it. No, it's Anno going in cycles. No one wants this, just Anno wants it. Anno wants to do it. It's not the public in Japan turning Evangelion into a marketing behemoth. It's no. Anno wanted to tell the same story 15 times. That's what he wanted to do. It's not like there's 30 different manga out there right now for Evangelion. There's not like a weird high school one where they have guns and swords and fight spirits like it's Bleach. There's not multiple high school AUs for Evangelion, both in video games and in like manga form. No, it's Anno wanting to repeat himself. Ridiculous.
I hate him with all my heart.
Yeah. Once again, the fans race in to downplay the mental state of Hideaki Anno. Most of their descriptions end with, he suffered from depression, a dismissive verbal hand wave so they can get back to square pegging Evangelion's schizophrenic plot into the round hole labeled genius. But
Anno's not schizophrenic, dude. He has depression. It's not like saying, oh, he has depression, it's no big deal. No, depression's a freaking serious thing, dude. People die from that. People suffer for decades of their life struggling with depression. Saying he has depression is not a hand wave. That is a statement of concern. No one just says, oh, he has depression, it's no big deal. No, that's like a serious thing. And Japan is famous for lacking mental health facilities to deal with it. People, when Eva fans say he has depression, they're not saying it dismissively. They're saying it with concern. Because the guy has depression. He does not have schizophrenia, dude. What are you on? Okay, whatever. Let's just hear him out.
Anno is a wholly self-absorbed person, to the extent he suffers mental illness and has attempted suicide, while creating characters as unbelievably transparent as...
Hang on a second. What did you say? Let me read that again. What the fuck did you just say?
her hospital gown because labeled genius. But Anno is a wholly self-absorbed person, to the extent he suffers mental illness and has attempted suicide, while creating characters as unbelievable.
I'm sorry. Did you just say he's a wholly selfish person for committing suicide? For attempting to commit suicide? Are you saying that he is selfish for being depressed? Are you saying someone is selfish if their depression gets the best of them? That mental illness is mental illness is an illness. It is not a choice. People don't choose to be depressed. They do not choose to be miserable. They are compulsed by the brain chemistry in their head to do so. Are you saying in your video that your conclusion to all of this, your big idea that you're trying to build up to, that you spent 40 minutes dodging around, is that because Anno is depressed, and this is a sign of selfishness, you say, that his wanting to end his life is somehow a sign of weakness? Just want to make sure I'm on the same page there. Are we sure who has the problem here?
Unbelievably transparent as Shinji Ikari to represent him in this story, who are as narcissistic as they come. My point is, this isn't mere depression. Depression is a symptom of many forms of emotional distress and many kinds of mental illness. Anno is not merely an emotionally troubled man prone to depression. Anno appears to have narcissistic personality disorder, which makes the implications of accepting his work as art a dangerous game to play, because by validating his expressions, you're validating his actual thoughts, instincts, and behavior.
First off, you're going to talk about narcissistic personality disorder and not mention Asuka? I'm sorry, I had to make that joke to lighten the movement there. But, dude, you're not a psychologist. You're not a psychiatric person. You're a guy on YouTube who writes movie reviews. You don't have an understanding of these issues. Depression is not a symptom of emotional distress. Depression is the cause of emotional distress. In some cases, they can interplay. They can go back and forth. But you're talking about mental states like you're an authority. Where's your fucking psych degree, man? Where's your fucking PhD in the field of psychology? You're talking with a real sense of authority. I'd like to know where your doctorate came from. What school you study under, man? Fucking psychology, man. Now you don't know what you're talking about. Now, when you're talking about film and storytelling, I will acknowledge that you have a point, because you have an opinion, you're a person, that's important. But the moment you start spouting about psychological evaluation and using terms like clinically insane, something that does not exist, it is legally insane. Insanity is a legal term. I would know because I used to work for lawyers. So I know this sort of stuff. You do not know what you're talking about. You are allowed an opinion about art, that is true. But the moment you take that into evaluating people's emotional and intellectual competency is where I got to ask a couple questions. Because if you're going to diagnose someone, you better have a degree to back it up. You don't see me making diagnoses because I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to psychology. All I know is what I've been told. What I've been told is by experts who can back it up. Can you? But maybe he can't. Maybe he has his degree in the last 20 minutes of this video. Maybe he knows what he's talking about. Maybe I'm talking prematurely. Maybe I'm pre-coming in this discussion here. As you say, to use your words. But let's discuss.
The end of Evangelion begins with one of the most controversial scenes in anime and cinema to this day. You want to watch fans of Evangelion squirm? Bring this scene up. There's really no way around it, and yet you'll watch them do this tap dance trying to figure out how to explain this away like it's an aberration, it's a thing that Hideaki Anno just didn't quite express correctly.
No,
he
expressed it perfectly.
That doesn't really represent Evangelion or its creator.
No, it perfectly represents the point of the series. What are you talking about? This scene is exactly what the show's building to. The show is building to, hey, you're a terrible person, and when all the chips are down, this is what you'll do. It is directly telling, Anno is directly telling his audience, this is what I think of you at your worst. Directly, potently, unflinchingly, disturbingly. It is an unpleasant scene. It is awful. It is disgusting. And that is the point of it. It is supposed to make you upset. It is supposed to hurt you. Why is this film critic claiming that film that makes you feel uncomfortable and upset is bad? It is awful. The characters acknowledge it as awful. It's not Anno failing to express it. He expressed it perfectly. This is a character who's emotionally broken, selfishly asking for help. And when he gets something that he selfishly likes, he acts selfishly. He is ashamed of it afterwards, but he still did it. Because he is a selfish person who only wants what he wants for himself. And that is awful. And that's what Anno thinks you will do. That is the point of that scene, essentially. It is horrible. And the characters acknowledge it as horrible. Shinji says he did something terrible to Asuka. During the pre-instrumentality scene, Asuka reacts to it like she's been assaulted, which she kind of has in the pre-instrumentality scene. If you interpret that scene as Asuka's actual soul responding and not just Shinji's projection of Asuka, it is either Shinji hating himself for what he did, or Asuka directly feeling like she's been assaulted by him, directly in the plot. It's one of those interpretations. Both indicate that Anno was very aware that this scene was awful. It was no accident. What are you talking about?
Very disappointed.
And Anno begins this redo by making Shinji even more repugnant than before.
Yes, that's the point.
Anno has a serious problem with the sexualization and fetishization of underage girls.
I wonder if my breasts would get bigger if I warmed them up. You think thermal expansion would make a difference?
How would I know?
As well as fantasies of underage kids having sexual relationships with adults. The imagery...
Okay, so you notice how Asuka always acts like an adult, quote-unquote an adult, which he perceives to be an adult. All the adults around her do not indulge her. They're like, get away. Go. Stop this. This is ridiculous. That's the point of her character. Also, there is something to be said for, and I'm actually making a video about fan service right now, and I do go into this in this video. Evangelion deliberately uses voyeurism to make you uncomfortable. It shows, it teases fan service the whole time. You're saying, oh, we'll have fan service next episode. Oh, thermal expansion, whatever. But increasingly, you are you are forced to watch characters at the most uncomfortable, unpleasant moments. What starts as, teases of fan service, become watching Misato in her room in disarray, like with the clothes spread out, being like a miserable person. You see people having intimate moments, but it's like, uncomfortable. It's like you see a reflection and that's it. And it's very disturbing and very upsetting, and it's heartbreaking, and it's sad, and it's tragic. That's the point of this whole thing. It's not meant to be fun. It's meant to be disturbing. It's meant to make you uncomfortable. And if you didn't pick up on that somehow, I don't know how you didn't, because it's meant to disturb you. It's not meant to make you happy. It is meant to make you as uncomfortable as possible, as if you just walked in on someone, like, in the worst day of their life, and now you can't leave. That is the point of these scenes. They are not meant to excite you. They are meant to upset you. And they succeed because they are deeply upsetting scenes.
Reused in the original Evangelion was overt in terms of viewing underage characters in sexual terms.
Okay. Hang on a second there. How did you not show that clip and realize that her wrists were slit? That's a sexual scene to you? A person who's emaciated and bleeding? I digress.
Of material only gets worse with the rebuild films, where Asuka spends much of the runtime in only her underwear with an open shirt, leaving almost nothing to the imagination, while the new... Rebuild has a problem with that. I'm not going to argue that point. That's another issue I have with Rebuild. The deliberate voyeurism of the original to make you uncomfortable is turned into just fetishization. That is, I will not argue that point. That's another issue I have with Rebuild and with Ava's general marketing since the original. New insert character serving as a rather obvious substitute for Anno's wife.
Why is he so particular at making fun of Anno's wife? Like, that's really weird, right? Like, he keeps mentioning Anno's wife like as a detractor. Anno's wife is an acclaimed manga creator. She's made manga. Like, she made a manga about her own married life. She's a giant figure in the manga industry. Why are you, like, criticizing her like, I don't know, whatever.
American Pie. Including sex in storytelling involving young people isn't anything new, nor is it necessarily inappropriate when it's a story focused on the lives of young people, provided of course the visuals don't cross lines and the dialogue does the appropriate amount of heavy lifting rather than allow the film to descend into softcore pornography. But where Evangelion is concerned, none of these contexts or restraints were applied by Anno. All of the Eva pilots must be 14 years old for reasons that are so thin, rice paper is plywood by comparison. Asuka constantly tries to force a Lolita-style relationship with Kaji, who rebuffs her. He's a reasonable, if oversexed adult who prefers the company of a...
Oversexed? He has sex with one person in the entire series. Once in college and once as like 29-year-olds. Is that oversexed? One partner over the course of 10 years is oversexed? Okay, sure.
Adult women like Misato. Shinji will have contrived sexual encounters.
Wait a second, you're just gonna leave the Asuka bit? That's a big part of her character, that she wants to be perceived as an adult. There's like a whole, like, the invasive part. You've not mentioned the mind rape scene. This whole time, you've avoided mentioning it. Did you not think that was important? The scenes where the angels invade the characters' brains and start to force them to confront their own problems? I find it strange how you kind of avoided that since you were so focused on, like, the angels' history. You refuse to show the scenes where the angels are trying to understand humanity by ripping apart invading their brains. Also, you've not mentioned Karu yet. That's kind of odd.
Rei and Asuka that are designed purely to exploit rather than inform. Gendo, as we've previously established...
I'm sorry, you just think the scene with two kids, like, say, let's kiss because we're bored, and then one kid pinches the other one's nose until they can't breathe is exploitative and not informative of their character arcs? Especially, again, in the mind rape scene, where we find that Asuka actually cried because she didn't realize that, because Shinji didn't kiss her back. That's a key point of her character arc, but again, what do I know? I've only seen the series a few times.
Established has a major creep factor going on with Rei, as she is partly the DNA of his dead wife. Misato will unsuccessfully attempt to seduce Shinji, and by the end of Evangelion, she will openly offer him sex upon his return from the final battle in some of the most unsettling dialogue I've ever heard.
Why are you not mentioning the fact that she was bleeding to death in this scene? I think that's kind of an important factor, but again, what do I know?
Misato dying minutes after this offer doesn't excuse the execution of this character choice in the script. And I can hear you weeaboos right now holding your breath ready to belt out that what's not comfortable for Western audiences is viewed as perfectly normal by Asian viewers and...
I'm not going to say that. I'll never fucking say that. Look, I'm from America. What I see is what I see, you know? I'm going to read it through my lens because I only have my own lens. I can say, oh, if I move myself and I see it from this perspective, but I can't do that because I live in another country. My worldview will affect the art I see no matter what I do, even if it's in opposition of moral. Here's the thing. People who say, oh, remove your cultural consciousness, just watch from their perspective. You're doing that because you have the moral perspective of your country's obligations. Opposition to that is still a response to those values instilled in you. You will never actually be able to completely remove your cultural biases from interpreting art from another country, no matter what you do. So you might as well just watch it honestly with yourself. Does it bother you? Does it upset you? Well, that's on you. That's how I see it. You can see it from another culture's perspective, yes, but at the end of the day, your interpretation of art will always be impacted by where you grew up, no matter how hard you try to unlearn it.
Shouldn't be judged through gaijin eyes. Answer me this. Who is credited with normalizing underage fan service in anime? For those of you unfamiliar, the term fan service is the dog whistle.
Go Nagai, actually. Go Nagai would be the one. He really pushed it back in the 70s. I'm actually working on a video about it right now. Go Nagai is a big factor. Though, of course, he's going to say Lolita the novel, because lollies and all that. That's what he's going to go with.
Created to label creepy sexual visuals in anime like upskirt shots, boob jiggle, outright nudity, pin-up interstitials, etc.
those panties?
Fans of this kind of anime, of which Evangelion certainly qualifies, are known as...
I would disagree. I don't think Evangelion qualifies as that. It never... Rebuild, yes. The original series, not so much, because it does use fan service as a ploy to make you uncomfortable at a certain point.
as otaku in Japanese society.
You can even see side by side the shots where Shinji is quote-unquote being seduced by Misato versus the panty shots and all the other anime that he's showing. Visually, you can see the difference. And yes, in response to that comment, I'm seeing Lolita is in opposition to that. The book Lolita, the point is that Humphrey, is that the character's name? Or Humpert, whatever the guy's name is. He has two first names. He's an awful person. You're meant to be revolted by him in Lolita. But again, let's see what he has to say. I'm sure I'm not going to agree with it.
Antisocial types who aren't able to function around other people and are just a few bad moments away from becoming full-on hikikomori, total agoraphobic recluses. Legendary anime director Hayao Miyazaki himself said otaku culture has damaged the anime medium, as so many otaku are now running anime productions while having no first-hand knowledge of how actual humans move, look, act, and interact with one another. This has created...
He has also praised Anno for being one of the best people he's worked under. Anno worked on Miyazaki on the film that resulted in Studio Ghibli's foundation. Anno worked with Miyazaki on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. There are videos of Anno and Miyazaki hanging out, and Anno teasing Miyazaki, and Miyazaki being totally fine with it. When Miyazaki is saying that about anime, he's talking to people like Makoto Shinkai. He's talking about people who make the more generics. No, maybe not Makoto Shinkai. That might be a step too far. I might be over-exaggerating there. I might be overstepping the bounds. He's talking to people like the isekai animators who make, not animators, but the animation directors, who make the generic stuff that's based on fantasy rather than reality. He's talking about the moe blob craze from the mid-2000s. He's not talking about Anno because he respects Anno. It's weird to cite Miyazaki against someone who Miyazaki personally helped foster the career of. But I digress.
All of the more infamous anime tropes people joke about, including the constant trend of unrealistic character designs, cringeworthy interpersonal dynamics, and exaggerated behavior that define most anime series. The point is, what
I would never say most anime. Several. But when you say most, you gotta get a statistic for that one, buddy. Because it sounds like you're speaking in broad brushstrokes.
Western anime weebs claim is normalized in Japanese society is really only normalized within Japan's otaku geek culture. It would be like saying, oh yeah, in America it's totally normal to put on a brown bathrobe and carry a toy lightsaber through a hotel, when in truth that isn't normalized by American culture.
Are you really comparing Star Wars to the sex culture of another country? Is that really the first thing you thought of? A better comparison would be this. The heroin chic look in the 90s and 2000s for models. Fat shaming was a big thing in 90s and 2000s media. It was pervasive. It was truly pervasive. It wasn't one fandom, it wasn't one group. It was a pervasive thing. Sex culture in a country is pervasive. It influences every single component of that country's medium. Saying that cosplaying a Jedi is comparable to the sex culture of Japan, which again, I'm not saying that what you're describing is normalized there. A lot of Japanese people are creeped out by otaku, undeniably so. But there are a lot of things in Japan that you're not acknowledging. There are signs on trains saying, hey, if someone gropes you, report it to an authority. They have to warn about that because it's a big enough problem. A lot of sexual assault is not reported in Japan. Again, this is a person who's making weird connections between genre fiction and problems outside of genre fiction. If you're talking about a whole country's perspectives, compare like to like, is all I'm saying. This is a bad comparison. I get what you're trying to say, but it's a bad comparison.
Star Wars fandom culture, which, while not limited to America, is not the dominant majority of any country. So I ask again, weebs, who is largely credited with being the pioneer of underage fan service in genre anime series? Well, some anime historians who are a lot smarter than me on the subject, unsurprisingly, cite Hideaki Anno as the creepy father of fans.
Oh my god, no, you... It's Go Nagai. Go Nagai is the guy who influenced Anno, and all these other guys. Go Nagai, Cutie Honey, and other shows like that were doing this stuff in the 70s, buddy. Anno hadn't even made his first film yet at this point. He was probably a teenager at this point, watching Go Nagai stuff. This is 20 years removed, dude. Hentai was made back in the mid-80s. The first thing Anno made at that point was Nausicaa. Cream Lemon came out the same year as Nausicaa, I'm pretty sure, and I don't think Anno had any influence on the anime genre at that point beyond designing the incredible God Warrior, is that it, from Nausicaa? No person who has any knowledge of anime would ever say that Anno, whose career really peaked in the late 80s, had an impact on a movement that started in the early 70s. That's just factually wrong. That's not even me saying, oh, hey, I disagree with you. You just don't know what you're talking about. Legend of the Overfiend had already been made before Anno had his, independent auteur career started. And that was the one that came with it. And, even that, it was aping from stuff made in the 1800s. This is the strangest attack on a creator I've ever seen. Because it's not based on any reality. You can... And this isn't just me being an obsessive fan. You can do 5 set. I literally found out some of this stuff starting on the Wikipedia page of fan service. That's how a lot of people do their first research. They're like, oh, what's a thing? Oh, Wikipedia says this. Oh, what sources the Wikipedia cite? And then they go down the rabbit hole based on the sources they cite, whatever you. The Wikipedia page on fan service will not mention Anno, period, until you get to Daikon 4. Daikon 4 is where the Gainax bounce happened. The Gainax bounce, if that's what you're going for, was already based on stuff that was done for decades before. And even then, anime wasn't the first thing to do fan service. I'm writing a whole video on this stuff, so I have a whole repertoire about that. If you want to see my full thoughts, go there. But you want to talk about fan service, let's talk about the British back in the 60s with Hammer Films. You advertise your dinosaur film by putting Raquel Welch in the bikini in your posters. She takes up more space in that bikini and that poster than the fucking dinosaurs do. And you're saying Anno is responsible for all of Japanese fan fiction culture when the British films were having a big influence on Japan in the 60s? And Lolita? And the general idea that sex sells? And the fisherman's wife a decade before that? And before even that, you go back to Tales of Genji and you have tons of sexual escapades in that. You're blaming Anno specifically for a whole culture's artistic movements? But again, he's going to mention Daikon 4 with the Gainax bounce. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. Let's see what he says.
They say it all began with Gunbuster, and having watched the series, I can't discount their theory.
It's not even the first Gainax series to have fan service. That's Daikon... Oh no, Daikon 3 is a short. Daikon 4 is a short. Daikon 3 and 4 is way sooner than that, and Gunbuster was 88. You already had Legend of the Overfiend out, and Dream Hunter Rem, and Cream Lemon by that point. And of course, the progenitor, Cutie Honey.
Once again,
which Anno also did an adaptation of.
Show about underage females having to pilot mecha to defend the Earth. In this iteration, not even having to wear pressure suits. Instead, jumping into their interstellar robots in their school workout onesies.
Speaking of interstellar, I will say Gunbuster is a better example of time dilation than Interstellar. By a mile. One reason I can't stand Interstellar? I'd already seen Gunbuster. Just saying.
There's physics-defying jiggle, nudity, and underage girls in relationships with abusive male adults, all in a one-stop shop of Hideaki Anno creep show. And then a few years later,
That's what you gotta say about Gunbuster? That it's a creepy show? That's your whole summation of it. Not the time dilation, the giant robots. Also, you're not mentioning Daikon 2, 3, or 4? That's those are the things that caused Gainax to have the reputation of jiggle physics that it had for decades. Daikon 3 and 4. The animated shorts at the Daikon convention. I'm pretty sure that was what it was. It's a great short. It has Star Wars in it, has some lightsabers. You'll appreciate it. You'll like it. Maybe.
Evangelion solidified the anime tropes of underage waifu girls and fan service with a heavy helping of pedo overtones for good measure. Thanks,
Again, he has
Mr.
not presented
Anno.
evidence that
I know
Anno
you've been jerking
originated.
off to me. Come on, do it right now. I want to watch you do it.
But unfortunately, we've now got to get back to
Wait, why'd you cut off half of her line, buddy? Because the other half of it is that if she doesn't get all of him, she doesn't want any of him, because she's repulsed by him, and it's her making fun of him and mocking him because it's her defense mechanism to because the next shot we see of her, she's miserable at a table, like hiding her face in disgust after the whole, that whole sequence. And again, it's meant to show she is repulsed by him. Like, she delivers the most violent verbal thrashing of this brat in that sequence. And it is well deserved and incredible. It is one of the best parts of that whole pre-instrumentality scene. And he begs for love, begs for like someone to just acknowledge him in a way that he wants. And she just says to his face with the coldest look in her eye, no. And that is the whole summation of the entire story. The idea that, hey, you may want all this, but if you treat others badly, you will get exactly what you sent out in return. It is a powerful, upsetting moment, and I find it strange how you keep cutting around those culminative moments to present your thesis. Because you have to ignore chunks of what happens to make your argument successful. But again, this is just me going off the cuff. I don't have any notes for this. I'm just pulling everything out of my butt, for all I know.
Shinji Ikari. 4. Begging
Seen that
everyone to
twice,
make him
but
the center of the
once in high school,
universe,
once
and
after
then
college.
literally being given the chance to be the center of the universe, then immediately trying to refuse that before getting into the mecha and being given the power over the fate of every human life on Earth. Because that's totally how life works.
That guy sucks.
I hate him with all my heart.
In the midst of his cosmic hallucination or whatever, he has a fateful encounter with Asuka in a reconstruction of Misato's apartment kitchen. At this point, keep in mind that while Asuka is an overly competitive, neurotic, and violently abusive egomaniac, she's been the only pilot able to—
I wouldn't say Asuka's violently abusive. That's Naru from Love Hina is violently abusive. Asuka is a bully. She's assertive, but I think violently abusive is really messed up. I don't know. I don't agree with that interpretation. But I feel like he's going to compliment her. So
to step up each time and channel her rage into action against the angels.
Even if Shinji isn't here, I can take care of that thing all by myself. Come on!
Going so far as to single-handedly stop all of Zila's automated Evas from destroying Tokyo 3. She was by herself because Shinji was once again paralyzed with depression and self-absorption.
One of the best scenes in the end of Eva.
Gee,
That
I
fight is
can't
incredible.
imagine who that reminds us all of at this point, and wouldn't get in his Eva to help her. As a result, she's killed in combat in the final moments of the battle. Asuka now sits despondent at the kitchen table as Shinji, much as he did over her hospital bed, begs and pleads for her to pay attention to him like the neurotic flea he is. He tells her how much he loves her, and she immediately refutes that.
You're the only one for me!
You're lying. You'd run up to anyone.
Rightly calling out his total selfishness and his
I take it
desperate
back.
want for
He's referring
literally
to it.
anyone to fill
Alright.
that emotional
Preemptive.
void for him. She tells him how pathetic he is, and he begs her to help him. Done with his bullshit, she flat out tells him
No.
and in that moment, Shinji proves everything Asuka was the only person smart enough to see about Shinji. He goes from pleading claims of love and friendship to sadistic rage on a dime. His hands around Asuka's throat, choking her to death. All because she wouldn't make him the center of her attention. After this, of course, he chooses to destroy us all so he won't feel lonely anymore. But after he destroys all of humanity and the entire planet, the little bastard changes his mind. Why? Because suddenly, with all human souls occupying the same entity, there is no privacy anymore. There are no secrets you can keep from others.
Okay, that scene with Shinji happens before the Asuka attack, though. So I'm just pointing it out there.
soul has been laid bare. So he reverses his decision and he rejects the form he chose for all of humanity that the rest of us didn't have a vote on. And his mother's spirit tells him that any human soul can return to its corporeal form if it has the will to do so. Unfortunately, the other few trillion people on Earth aren't given that memo. So
other few trillion? How many people do you think are on Earth, buddy? It's like 9 billion at most. And this is also after half the world population has been eradicated. So we're looking more at, what was the population in 2000s? Is that 6 billion? So like 3 billion people at most? Before all the wars that started? You're looking at a billion tops.
Shinji wakes up on a beach against a sea of red liquid and a completely wrecked and lifeless planet
LCF,
Earth by himself. Or so he thinks at first. Lying next to him is Asuka, now with an eye patch because apparently you can return to your human body, but they can't fix that eye you just lost for some dumb reason, even though your whole body was basically disemboweled. Damn it, sorry. I promised myself I wouldn't get into the logic problems with this story. Jurors, you will disregard that part of my testimony. Anyway, Asuka is lying next to him, very likely because her will is so strong as a character, she auto-regenerated the moment she had the option.
Well, it's because she was able to recover and find value in her life. She had the arc that everyone wanted Shinji to have, where she fell into the deepest of, probably a worse depression than Shinji, I would argue, by a lot, and was able to find self-actualization through the realization that her fundamental beliefs in life were wrong, and wrong in a way that was positive. You know, that she believed she was not worthy of love and that no one loved her, but then she finds out she is loved. That's a beautiful element of the plot, I think, that he's glossing over to make Asuka just sound like a badass. But really, it's a really beautiful story of vulnerability. But again, this is from someone who has watched the show multiple times and deeply appreciates the characters in it. So, I digress.
Who knows? And Shinji, looking at her, eye patch and all, having just screamed bloody murder to the heavens when he saw her dead on the battlefield, having just determined he wanted to be an individual and experience pain as well as joy, having just ostensibly had the biggest single epiphany a human could have, turns over...
No, you're wrong already. This is not just after that. We see in the scene that Shinji has put up posts around the beach. There is a scene where you see Misato's cross nailed to a wooden post. That cross had... Now, when we last saw the cross, it was covered in blood, yes, but it was fairly clean. In this shot, it is tarnished. This implies that time has passed. A significant time has passed. Shinji has been alone on this beach for I don't know how long. The implication here is he's lost his mind. That he's genuinely... The isolation has gotten to him, and that he is so desperate that he is no longer attached to reality. That is the implication I've always gotten. But again, I digress. Some people argue this is a pregnancy thing. I think that's ridiculous, but what do I know?
And starts trying to choke Asuka to death
at least a few weeks,
again.
Yeah. Let me get this straight.
She strokes his cheek, he eases up on his second attempt to murder her, starts crying like Shinji always does, she calls him disgusting, and Evangelion is over, with a destroyed planet devoid of life but for a narcissistic psychopath and his victim. The weeaboos generally rejoice at this point and declare Evangelion a masterwork of story.
No one really rejoices at this scene. It's a sad, disturbing, depressing end to the series. I remember when I first saw this ending, I actually didn't... I'll be honest, I was like a teenager when I first saw the end of Eva. Obviously I'd never seen anything like this. This was a first-time experience for me. I backed away from the computer, just kind of sat there, and because I legally, I downloaded it, This is back when the end of Eva was out of print. And I just kind of sat there. I didn't have a reaction. I just kind of stared at the screen, and I didn't know what to think. I had never seen it. I'd not seen David Lynch at this point. I had seen a couple Cronenberg films. I'd never seen the extreme disturbing stuff I've seen now. So I just kind of sat there and was like, what is this? Like, I didn't know how to think of it. It was in my brain for the next day. I didn't know how to process it. But I think now, almost 2 decades later, that it was something profound. This is a profound ending. It's upsetting. It's heartbreaking. It's not good. It's not positive. But profound is not always positive. Ooh, actually, yeah, that's why there's a pregnancy theory, because they were using pregnancy pain. There you go.
Storytelling brilliance tantamount to cosmic poetry. They consistently fail to realize that we have witnessed a story written by a narcissist about a narcissist analog of himself that destroys the planet and all human life because they wouldn't pay enough attention to him, only to reverse the decision for himself, which results in this lone narcissist inheriting a dead planet in a final act of immeasurable selfishness. Does
this guy know what tragedies are? Does this guy know tragic storytelling? There's stories that have bad endings because the characters bring about the bad ending on their own. This is by design. This is a deliberate decision to make a story that is bleak, hopeless. This is not an ending you should be happy about. It's an ending you should be miserable about because it's supposed to be.
Didn't try to use his power to bring back anyone else, and the one person who also managed to come back.
Wait, you can't bring back anyone else. They have to bring themselves back. That's the point of the series. It's self-actualization, not someone else dragging them into existence.
The other side of her own sheer will, he tries to murder immediately. Fans of Evangelion begin to discuss how much they relate to Shinji, how much they've felt alone and scared in their lives. I haven't seen a single one yet cop to admitting they want everyone else on the planet to die, though. And I get the sense it's because they aren't thinking that deeply about the implications of the actual story and its creator, Anno.
As we said before, you're not supposed to want to be Shinji. They relate to him because they know that deep down, if the chips were down, they might be the same way. Might. Not will, but they might be the same way. That's the heartbreak of the series. It's supposed to be upsetting. You don't want to be Shinji, but you know in a place deep down, you might be him in that situation. And that's why they relate to him. It's not because they want to relate to him. It's because they are uncomfortable with the fact that they would relate to him.
See a character feel an emotion they felt, or say something they once said or thought, and that's all they need to make the audacious claim, I relate to him! But the truth is, there's no way the majority of Evangelion fans can relate to Shinji Ikari, not unless you are yourself someone with malignant narcissistic personality disorder. I can hear you now. Michael, you can't prove Anno or Shinji have narcissistic personality disorder. But the thing is, I can prove it. Because for 25 years, I was the victim of someone with this disorder.
Okay, but that doesn't have anything to do with Anno. You don't know the guy. You never met him. You're prescribing... Okay, so what you're doing is you're projecting issues onto him. But I digress.
When Evangelion kicked off with the first few episodes, as a mecha fan, I was with the show. Shinji was a little wimpy at the beginning, but it looked like he was going to find his own...
Ooh, okay, response here. In my own experience, I've never seen anyone say they relate to Shinji. I have seen a lot of people relate to Shinji, and they're pissed about it. That's the thing. They're angry that they relate to Shinji. They don't want to relate to Shinji. He is projecting a lot. He's acting like Shinji occupies the same role as a Luke Skywalker. He doesn't. He's not a hero. He is an anti-hero at best. But no, a lot of people relate to Shinji, but they say that they are upset by it. That's what he should be saying. But he's also misrepresenting their argument a lot.
Strength. I was really enjoying the episodes where he and Asuka had to learn to work together to fight the angels.
I do love
the show was a bit creepy in places, but I chalked that up to anime tropes like we've all been trained to for years and years. Unfortunately, this didn't last long. Shinji wasn't getting better and kept reverting back to a worse version of his original self again and again.
Tragedy.
What I didn't know was in the background, Anno was having multiple mental breakdowns. You remember, those things Eva fans dismiss as mere depression. Shinji doesn't get better because Anno doesn't get better because there is no treatment for narcissistic personality disorder.
Anno was going to therapy when the show really goes downhill. He was having these breakdowns during the first half. In his therapy, he applied his therapy into his storytelling. No one's dismissing it as depression. Everyone who has ever known Evangelion talks about Anno's emotional breakdowns. What are you talking about, my guy?
But he's not a narcissist, Michael. He's just mentally ill and depressed. Ever noticed how nobody has defined exactly what is wrong with Anno beyond...
Depression's a specific clinical disease, dude.
depression, even though it's right there in his work? That's because, and I firmly believe this, that most people have never been on the other side of a person with his condition, so they can't—
Dude, people have had depression. They recognize what depression is. People who are depressed recognize depression in other people.
Can't see it for what it is when it's standing right in front of them. Narcissistic personality disorder brings with it severe lows of depression, and the mood swings can be extreme. But more than that, people like Shinji demand all of your adoration and praise, while constantly reminding you of all the things they can't do or are too scared to do.
Here's my issue, dude. If Anno was really had narcissistic personality disorder and was projecting his narcissism onto Shinji, why would he present Shinji as the worst? A narcissist projecting would make them the hero of the story, make them the best despite their shortcomings. Why would Anno, with narcissistic personality disorder, if he had that, design Shinji to be as loathsome as possible in so many scenes? He would just frame it. Why would he have him struggle to get things? Why would he have the other characters tell him to their face, you are trash? If Anno really had narcissistic personality disorder, and he really used it to fuel his own character writing, and that's really what you're saying is the concept, then why do so many characters despise Shinji? Why does Asuka have her complete, exacting criticism of him? It makes no sense. Make it make sense, guys.
In some cases, such as the one I experienced, these people often self-sabotage these endeavors despite the hunger for attention because they ultimately want as much adoration for as little effort as possible. In the case I experienced, this friend would often say without a hint of irony that their aspiration in life was, quote, "I want to arrive." They wanted to show up and just be awesome in the eyes of everyone around them. But this heightened level of misplaced self-confidence would pendulum swing into depression and complete helplessness like clockwork, as they would give a million excuses why they couldn't do something and then demand everyone's total emotional support and attention, or else they'd frequently become enraged, always verbally abusive, sometimes choosing physical violence. Their want to control the decision—
I'm not sure if that's narcissism, but it's something. It's definitely abusive behavior. But are you saying a person who wanted to be loved no matter what, who would just show up and not do any work, is equivalent to equivalent to a war-traumatized teenager or an anime director who spent over a decade working his way to the top, and then still going with a company that was already going to file for bankruptcy no matter what? That's really what you think? Do you think that's comparable? Hey, listen, I'm not saying your life experience was good. It sounds awful. That person sounds like a terrible person to be around. A toxic, abusive narcissist. Sure. But knowing a narcissist doesn't mean that you have an understanding of how to diagnose it. You know. Okay.
Decisions and emotions of others is absolute. This person in my life actively attempted to sabotage every relationship I had with girlfriends, even going so far as direct confrontation with threats in some cases, until it reached the point where I had to keep my dating life completely separate and a secret from them. Actively undermining my relationships with other friends who weren't even romantic interests was a daily headache that also took a toll on me. There were the physical fights, the many verbal screaming conflicts, the projectiles they hurled at me as they voiced their dissatisfaction with the level of personal attention they felt I hadn't been paying them, and the constant emotional abuse and manipulation. I once watched them almost surgically choose which one of their friends' ex-girlfriends to sleep with to destroy their entire social circle within hours. The sobbing and the breakdowns start as they claim to hate themselves for 10 minutes, while demanding your full support and attention for the next 10 hours. Then there was the day in 2002, when I came home to my apartment in Los Angeles after a very long day working. I'd gotten my friend an internship with a production company I had connections with. They were staying with me through the summer, but within weeks they'd been so needlessly confrontational and aggressive with these people while not doing any of the work asked of them, I couldn't get my contacts at the company to return my calls. This person had destroyed my professional relationships with them just as they had so many in the past. You might be wondering why I would have offered this person that opportunity if I already had years of exposure to their behavior. It's because you don't immediately put the equation together when it's a devil you know. Excuses are made for people like this by everyone around them. In real life, these people, while being acutely abusive most of the time, are highly charismatic on their good days to the extent that people who aren't around them...
Right, this is all very upsetting, and I'm sorry you had to deal with that, genuinely. But what does that have to do with a fucking anime? Like, seriously, this is terrible. No argument there. This is a terrible, terrible thing. But you are making a review about an anime. The anecdotes shouldn't be 1/10 of the review. Like, it's awful. Genuinely. I'm so sorry you went through that. And that is an awful thing to say. But what does this have to do with the show you're criticizing? What does any of this have to do with what you're talking about? Like, it's awful you went through that. Genuinely, I am sorry. If you are watching this and you've gotten this far, I am sorry you went through that trauma. That is horrible. No one should ever experience that. But what does this have to do with people you've never met in your life? What does it have to do with Anno? Are you saying Anno didn't put the work in? Is that what you're saying? A guy having an erratic, let's say the worst of what you said so far, that he has an erratic work environment and has done some pervy stuff. Let's say that's the worst of it. That doesn't correlate with what you're talking about. They're totally different things. There's no correlation. There's nothing. I can't see a single connection between what you're describing and this, beyond the fact that Anno was aware of people like that and made a show outlining why that's a terrible thing to be. If anything, you should be happy Anno made this show. Because it's showing, it's a case where he's showcasing the damage people like that can cause on an external, larger scale. I don't understand where you're coming from with this, but let's keep hearing. Maybe, again, like he told me, don't want to prematurely come. That's a logical thing to tell someone when they say 10 minutes in, I don't like your video. But
them regularly think they walk on water and are just amazing personalities. And just enough people coddle them for enough years that when you personally wake up and realize the prison you've been in with this person, everyone else thinks you're overreacting or being unfair.
You're not going to die. Because I will protect you.
So there I was in my apartment realizing they'd thrown the internship over their shoulder, destroyed most of my professional contacts in the process, and as I looked at the rollout bed in the floor of my small living room, I rapidly determined they were spending their time in my small studio apartment having sex with some girlfriend they'd picked up thanks to some obvious stains on the sheets. Sound familiar yet? Huh? I immediately confronted them about this, and in the argument that followed, they called themselves a genius and said I was stupid for working a job and taking orders from people.
Well, you certainly have some balls, but that kind of bluster won't win any praise from us, Shinji Ikari.
I'm not looking for any praise. I'm the only one who can pilot it, isn't that right?
You're only proving that Anno understands how these people function and is showing why they're terrible. Bizarrely, you're actually giving praise this series, even if you don't realize it. Because you're showing how Anno clearly understands how damaging these people are. And then in his show, presented a damaging, toxic system of relationships that make people worse. Which, again, is what we've all been saying. But I digress.
They said I'd be better off starting a production company with them, which was insane given this person had no money to start such a venture and I barely had any myself. But that's how narcissists operate. They said they knew me better than I knew myself, and how I needed to focus my energy on working with them on screenplays. I told this person they were out to lunch and that I wanted them out of my apartment by the weekend since they'd squandered the internship. At that point, they started in with the threats of destroying my property and my apartment. I told them if they said another word, I would call the police. And that's when the airs of arrogant benevolence changed on a dime to psychotic rage, and suddenly hands were around my throat, white-knuckled, and they screamed, "I'll kill you." I was pushed to the floor on my back, and I told them to go ahead and do it, because it wouldn't change anything for them. That's when they spit in my face. What, you thought Evangelion was a mecha fantasy you just geek out over? No, it's a sad cry for help, with Anno at its center. There was no reason for Anno to make this a sci-fi mecha story. This...
Oh my god, you outright describe a show that a man makes that is compelling, that is showing psychologically realistic characters, dealing with their own neuroses in a realistic way. By your own admission, you're drawing a connection saying, hey, this show is just like this horrible experience I had, a traumatic experience. You can see parallels between your life and this. And you're saying that's bad? You're saying it's bad that an artist created a work that was like realistic and grounded and effective? That's a bad thing? Well, I hate to see what you think is a good thing if you think realistic writing is bad.
This could have been set in a realistic slice of life setting, and his insane narcissistic message would still come through. I managed to fight them off me, bruising their ribs in the process. A few days later,
that's one thing that's a little weird, though. Why would it matter if it's science fiction or drama? Yeah, it could be a drama, but it's not, because the drama wouldn't have that same world-ending stress, the war, the external conflict that would drive these characters to these isolated mentalities. And besides, he didn't make a drama. Anno has made dramas. If you haven't seen them, they're live-action dramas. They're made in like the early 2000s. I don't think they work as well as his more fantastical sci-fi stuff, but he's made some dramas, and they are in the same vein as this. He made Karikana, which is one of the best shoujo anime of the 90s. But, like, the criticism that he could have made a drama instead of a sci-fi doesn't make any sense to me. Like, sure, he could have. He just chose not to. Who cares?
They left. It would be another 8 years of on and off contact with more incidents that approached this level of madness before I finally decided this person's presence in my life couldn't even be occasional. I had to cut them out entirely. And if some of you right now are saying, okay, Michael, so there are some similarities between Shinji and this asshole you knew. So what? That doesn't mean Evangelion is a narcissist manifesto. Actually, yes it does, because Anno is clearly a narcissist. Narcissism doesn't guarantee you're outgoing. It guarantees you have fatal levels of insecurity. It doesn't guarantee you're charismatic. It guarantees you're completely focused on your own feelings and are fixated on how everyone else around you should benefit your life.
Yeah, so do a bunch of other personality disorders. Like, there's more than just narcissistic personality disorder. There's many personality disorders. If it was so easy to diagnose people with psychological illnesses, there'd be no need for psychiatrists. You could just go on WebMD and find the first result you find. Like, oh, there you go, that's my psychological disorder. People are trained in this for decades of their life because it's not easy to tell what someone has based on just your first experience. He could have schizoid personality disorder. He could have depression. He could have acute anxiety disorder. He could have rejection-sensitive dysphoria. There's so many mental illnesses you can have that overlap with what you're describing. And those are a couple off the top of my head. I don't know psychology. I just know what I've heard of people talk about who do know psychology. So I know a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. But I know enough to know that you're. It's like saying, oh, hey, you have a stuffy nose. You have COVID, without doing a test. You could have COVID, could have the flu, could have whooping cough, could have RSV, could have the common cold. It's like a jump in logic. Yeah, it could be that, but you got to test first. Again, this is a little extreme.
Anno was asked to be a guest teacher at a Japanese grade school. The assignment he gave the kids before he arrived was to draw images of what they thought he might look like and write down their speculations about his personality. The guy couldn't even just teach grade schoolers basic shit. He had to find a way to make the first session all about him and have all of these kids talk to him about him.
どうしてあんな不思議な宿題を出したのか聞いてみた。
周りが持ってる情報に踊らされることなくですね、自分の持ってる想像力とか自分のイメージとか、そういうのをスタートにちょっとやってみたいと。ほとんど情報のないところで一人の人間というものをイメージしてもらう、そういうところからスタートして実際に本人が現れて最終的に僕というものをある程度イメージしてですね、キャラクターというのが作れればいいな。
なるほど。授業の目的は僕、つまり安野さんをイメージしてアニメのキャラクターを作ること。
自分が作ったアニメは好きですか？
好きといえば好きですけど、結構嫌いなところもあります。
嫌いなところはどんなところですか？
自分が出てるところ。
That's narcissism. Flat out.
Well, what's the point of the lesson? Was it about first assumptions? Was it about trying to show how the reality was less impressive than the imagination? You tell a bunch of kids, oh, hey, you're going to meet an anime director. What do you think he's going to look like? And he comes up looking like Anno. You know, he's not the coolest guy. He is very acutely aware of his shortcomings. Again, if you read Anno's wife's manga, you'd know that. The guy literally decided to go on a diet because he wanted to cosplay as Ultraman. And then that was the whole objective of that one chapter in the manga. I remember that. It was very distinctly for some reason. And his wife's teasing him about the whole time, but it's like an affectionate kind of way. Like, he's a very idiosyncratic person. He is a very odd person. No argument there. But your first conclusion is narcissism, as opposed to anything else, without knowing what the lesson actually was supposed to prove. It could be just an ego trip. I'm not saying it isn't. But I'm saying, based on what you're describing, without knowing what the point of the lesson was, just the assignment, you don't know what you're talking about. You just know a piece of it. Because you're basing massive assumptions off of really minor points. You're making gigantic claims. And gigantic claims need gigantic evidence.
Sixth gear, pedal to the floor self-absorption. Anno and my aforementioned friend have been lauded as geniuses. They tend to be compelling writers because they're manic emotional car crashes, but they also can't get out of their own way, and in a very specific way when their unreasonable needs aren't met. My friend would tell us they were the glue that held our social circle together, when in reality they were the person causing the most damaging chaos. Challenge them on that, and they'd pivot from those inaccurate and cringy kumbaya feels to a willingness to burn down everyone and everything. We see that in Anno as well through Shinji, a character who desperately...
Yeah, but here's the difference there. People have confronted Anno and made fun of him to his face, and he hasn't just burned down the world as a result. Shinji did at the very end of his rope. After being traumatized, after losing everything he loves, after having to kill the one person who showed him love at a time when he was at his lowest. The situations are not comparable. A narcissist throwing a temper tantrum because he was challenged once is not the same as a child who's been going through a year of emotional turmoil. This would be like watching the end of Full Metal Jacket and saying Vincent D'Onofrio's character was a narcissist for doing what he does at the halfway point of Full Metal Jacket. They say Full Metal, must have been Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal, there's too many Full Metal stories. Full Metal Jacket, the Kubrick film. Halfway through, he's traumatized in boot camp, which is actually far less traumatizing than what Shinji goes through. And he snaps. Is that narcissism? The film doesn't frame it as that. Shinji Ikari going through cosmic horror experiences, his body disappearing, all of his friends, all of his support systems going out one by one, being abused by his father for all of his life, having to murder the... You have not mentioned Kaoru this entire video. I find that very strange, because he's a major character in the end. He's a major factor into why Shinji is like the way he is in the end of Evangelion, but again, what do I know?
Who wants praise and attention, is afraid of everything including loneliness, but is willing to kill everyone on Earth as he feels they deserve it because he's lonely and the world hasn't done enough to make him feel better. Who expresses these kinds of batshit crazy sentiments in a story wholly unironically with a straight face? Someone with narcissistic personality disorder. To them, this entire motivation makes total sense, even as they have additional mental breakdowns throughout the production process, which derails the story further and shackles the fate of the series to the manic emotional shifts of the creator. And that's my whole point about Neon Genesis Evangelion and its many remakes and revisions. It isn't a story infused with universal truths about our collective humanity. Evangelion is the cinematic ravings of a mentally ill narcissist whose brain is so noisy and nonsensical. The result is a series that makes H.P. Lovecraft feel like a Harry Potter novel. And that's not a compliment. Insanity, pedophilia, genocide, sadism, misogyny, supremacy. If you've been one of the many people who has called Hideaki Anno a genius, you need to take stock of your values. To hold up and validate lunacy as truth is a dangerous game our society has played in all corners of humanity for too long, and nowhere is it more commonplace than the art world. The creator of Evangelion has stated publicly his constant battles with mental illness. That means neither he nor his thoughts about the world are coming from a place of rational perspective. If his fans and Eva admirers spoke about this series as the greatest jackass stunt in anime, that would at least indicate they also understand it shouldn't be taken literally. But they don't. They call it art. In doing so, fans continue the long and troubling tradition of giving insanity life, giving it agency, and ultimately giving it power while calling it the greatest anime of all time. I wonder, would you feel differently if the hands had ever been around your throat?
No, because they have been around my throat before.
Disgusting.
My guy, people have experienced trauma in their lives. You're not unique in that, to be bluntly put. And Evangelion points the same thing out. The characters are not unique for their trauma. They all have different trauma that negatively impacts them in different ways, and they all respond to it differently. This has to be one of the most ego-driven things I've seen in a very long time, ironically, considering it's about ego. This video's big claim is to say Evangelion is morally reprehensible. That's the big claim at the end of the day. I'm not going to dignify it by saying specifically narcissism, which is a whole specific personality disorder. There are tons of personality disorders out there, and they all have very distinct diagnoses. You have to be properly diagnosed. It takes months of close observation to determine it, without a doubt, that you have a personality disorder. This individual claims... I'm going to make a quick summation because I know it's been a long video. This has been longer than I expected, 3.5 hours. I always made fun of those guys who had like 5-hour videos about something. I'll make this short because I gotta get some sleep and my throat is like dead. If you claim that someone has a neurosis, has an issue, a personality disorder, you better prove it. Just saying it, that's irrelevant. Anyone can say someone has a personality disorder. People have accused me of tons of things online. Who cares? They don't have any facts. They don't have any evidence. It's just a gut feeling they have. Or worse, they want to insult someone, and they find a good, easy insult to go. You're unwell. Easy insult to make. But you gotta prove it. If you're making a claim, this kind of thing, with this format, with this length, you gotta prove it. Get the receipts. Get the tests. But you don't have those tests, do you? You're going off gut instinct. You're going off feeling. Okay. You're going off feeling. Well, it's my feeling that you want to make this big claim about something that made you uncomfortable because it reminded you of your past trauma. I say that because you directly state it. And that made you uncomfortable. Okay. That proves the art worked. It's not a failing that it made you think of that. That was the intention. You're acting like it was a shock, that it was morally reprehensible this show made you upset. That's the point of the story. You got angry at it for accomplishing its intended result. And yeah, it does stink, doesn't it? Trauma is awful. People deal with awful stuff all the time. Myself very much included. And there are things I've experienced in my life that are horrible. And I empathize. I really do. I feel bad for you and hope you better in your life. But at the same time, you're actively insulting everyone who enjoys this series, who genuinely feels an emotional connection to this series. They find catharsis. Maybe not happiness, but catharsis. Myself included. Catharsis in this series is a whole grand amount. It is upsetting, though. Catharsis isn't fun. It's not pleasant. It's just intense. Happiness is fleeting. Satisfying endings with heroes who do great things. We need those stories too, no doubt about that. But if every story was the same, the world would be a very boring place. Art should be challenging. And it sounds like this art did challenge you. I would say that's a sign the show did something right. I think a failure of a show is not a series that upsets you, but a series that leaves you with no impression whatsoever. The worst a story can be is a nothing experience. But you have to insult everyone with mental illness in the process of justifying why a show made you uncomfortable. Now look, there are criticisms of Evangelion, undeniably, and I can make 100 of them myself, as a fan of the series. And I have, in writing, multiple times, criticized the series. They are flaws. No doubt about that. But discussing the flaws of an anime is different than insulting a man in his integrity and his career. Because again, if you're gonna make that accusation, you better come up with some good points. Saying, I kind of felt like it was like an experience I had is not a good point. It's just not. It's a defensive argument, sure. It's a provocative one, but it's not a meaningful argument. It doesn't actually matter. It doesn't. It sucks to say, but you have to come up with concrete proof that what you're saying is true. And I'm sure if you're watching this, if you are, I don't think you are, because I feel like you're the kind of person who dismisses anyone who ever criticizes their perspectives. You know, if you're watching this and you're open-minded to criticism, then yeah, evaluate the threads of your argument. Take a look at it. Say, okay, did any of this logically connect to my final thesis, that this man's a narcissist? You acknowledge saying, most of your defenses are like, yeah, you're going to say, oh, he's not a narcissist, but I disagree because he's a narcissist. And I know he's a narcissist because I've seen narcissism. Okay. Well, I've seen zebras. Doesn't mean I can tell you with a definitive fact that a horse is a zebra because they have hooves. That's the logic of this argument. It doesn't connect. It's not that connective tissue you need to fully cement your argument clearly. And it's disappointing because you start off with some decent points here and there, but the moment you bring in Anno as like this boogeyman, that's when you really lose me. As from an argument perspective. And from a moral perspective, you make me angry. Because quite frankly, if you're going to insult someone, you need evidence to prove that what you're saying is correct. It ironically, in arguing that he's narcissistic, you sound narcissistic in a weird way. Because you're acting as though your opinion is the be-all, end-all of the situation. That you have the moral absolutism to say, hey, this is what it is. Maybe I'm overstepping my bounds with that one. That is a low blow, I admit. I don't have a psych degree, so I can't diagnose you with anything, nor would I. But again, neither do you.